Okay, well, I have some exciting news for everybody that I get to share with you. A friend of mine, Reverend Jeffrey Mensendick, and I met a few years ago in seminary, and he lives, I will let him introduce himself, but I'm really excited to have him with us on Worldwide Communion Sunday because he is with us from Japan. So Jeffrey, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing.
Okay. I've been a missionary for the United Church of Christ for the past 30 years. And actually, my parents were missionaries, so I grew up in Japan. It wasn't like I wanted to follow in my parents' footsteps. And actually, during college, I was quite rebellious. I didn't really feel much for the church. But after several experiences, and I really had a respect for my parents and for what the United Church of Christ stands for in terms of justice and peace. And so I thought, well, I'll give seminary a chance. And that's when I met Lisa. And it led me into where I am today. Right now, I teach at a university called J.F. Oberlin University. It's named after the college in Ohio, Oberlin College, because the founder of our university studied at Oberlin. And I teach Christian studies to Japanese students, most of whom have no experience with Christianity. And they have a lot of preconceptions that are sort of, Christianity doesn't have a good name. And so a lot of my work is to dispel some of their doubts and fears and to show them, the good parts of Christianity as well as some of the bad parts of Christianity. So that's what I do. I live in Kobe, which is a big city, over maybe 1.5 million people. And my wife is Japanese, and I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are in college. The youngest one is an 8th grader. So is that enough?
Yeah. And you sent your kids to the States to college. So how did you make that decision? Or how did they make that decision?
Well, the big decision, they went to Japanese elementary school. And because their mother is Japanese, we speak Japanese at home. So I would say that our kids, their first language or their most comfortable language would be Japanese. And because I speak Japanese, most of their conversation at home is Japanese. And so we made a decision after they graduated from elementary school to put them into an English curriculum. And that was a big decision. One concern of mine is that Japanese education is almost like a military. You have to conform and you have to compete. And people at the top have absolute power. So this very conformist atmosphere takes away from the individual creativity, enjoyment of life, questioning. And I think the English curriculum, it allows the individual, much more freedom to explore who they are, to be different. And especially for our kids who are, half American, half Japanese. I think it's the Japanese schools at times would be tough for people who are different. So that was a big decision we made. And then as they graduated from high school, my wish was for them to get to know America because that's part of who they are. And so 4 years of college is actually, a chance to learn, not only, graduate with a degree, but it's a place to socialize with people your own age and figure out what America's all about and some of the bad things that happen. America's not all good. So the good and the bad of America as well. And then they can appreciate Japan again. If you're outside the country, you learn to appreciate the good part and the bad part of Japan. So
yeah, neat experience for that. Excuse me. I had one question about something you said about teaching your students. Give us a little picture of so you said Christianity doesn't have like a really great reputation in Japan. Just give us a brief, like experience of what the thought is about Christianity and how did that happen, or do you know?
Well, I think I'll summarize it in 2 points. The first is that you may know that when Japan went to war, they had something called the emperor system, and the emperor was God. And so everybody in Japan was a son of the emperor, and it was a religion based on Shintoism. So after the war, during the American occupation, education was taken away from that religious institution, and it was secularized, so that they don't teach religion in the schools. And that means that most Japanese people are quite ignorant when it comes to religion. So that's one issue. The other issue is that especially American Christianity, it's almost like a market Christianity, where because the government doesn't control religion, everybody's out to gain more people into their fold, right? And so it's like free enterprise. And people are crossing the ocean to make more Christians, and they're stopping you on the street. The Mormons do it too. And they come to your door and they press the button and want to talk to you about their brand of religion. And so Japanese people, not having any base in an understanding of religion, feel that these salesmen of religion are a bit pushy and self-centered, like self-serving. And some groups like to sort of spread fear. Like if you don't believe the way we do, you're going to go to hell. So those kinds of groups, I would say rather conservative Christian groups, have really made a big impact. Not all of us are like that. I'm a missionary. I don't do that. But, the gentle Christians, they never get much coverage in the media, or, they don't get out on the streets and stop you and tell you about their religion. But the more aggressive Christians have left sort of a sour taste in the mouth of many Japanese. And so a lot of the students that I teach see religious people as out to get you, or that religion is the original reason why people go to war, like Muslims and Christians. That's often brought up. So when they actually sit down and, like, if I tell them what some of the words in the Bible or some examples of people who have lived awesome lives, and that Christianity is about service It's about listening, or yeah, those more subtle, um, the more gentle part of our religious heritage. They're very impressed. So that's my challenge, I guess.
Yeah, and I would just think from what you said too, there's just so many cultural differences about how people interact and what's appropriate behavior. You know, cultural competency was a little bit lost on early missionaries and later Christians and things like that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the various things? Well, first of all, you know what? Maybe help people understand just briefly the whole missionary movement in the UCC, like from the Congregationalists, they were the original missionaries that went out, and then where we're at now as the UCC and, you know, missionaries, we don't really call them that, you know, tell them a little bit about the structure.
Well, I don't know how much history to get into here, but
Sure.
short, yeah. There's an interesting book out about that's called Protestants Abroad,
Oh.
and how in the late 1800s, missionaries were going overseas trying to convert the world. But the subtitle of this book is How Missionaries Tried to Convert the World, how missionaries tried to change the world, but they ended up changing the United States. And
Oh, interesting.
that these missionaries went overseas and they came in touch with all sorts of peoples and religions and different ways of thinking, and they became cosmopolitan. But the people back in the pews in America were much more parochial. And so, and America was not really interested in, you know, involving itself overseas. So when the missionaries came back to America, you know, they were more open towards the world, as opposed to the people living in America who had never gone overseas. So it's an interesting book.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a whole history there of that. The negative side is there's sort of this white supremacist thread that has been a part of mission, and how it has worked with colonialism, and how it has been a part of spreading America, you know, American values, or, you know, that something like white-centeredness. But on the other hand, there's a whole ethos of standing up for people who are discriminated against, being a voice for those who find themselves voiceless. And in this book, if you ever find it, there, you know, there's some stories about how missionaries have stood their ground in the face of some American, you know, policies for the sake of justice and what is right. So the UCC has this, you know, from the congregational side, long history of the American Board. And these days, we're a rather rare breed. There aren't that many UCC missionaries any longer. I think there are several reasons for that. The American church has become more they're more concerned about homelessness and prejudice in their own country. That's one thing. A lot of people are reflecting on the colonialist kind of mentality, and how missionaries sort of were a part of that. And so there's sort of a negative, you know, image of mission. That's another part of it. And another part may be money, that our churches are less interested in sending people overseas. And so, you know, our global ministries doesn't have that much money. we have the One Great Hour of Sharing, uh, that supports our ministries. And maybe also there aren't as many people. 100 years ago, it was the thing to go overseas and prove yourself. And there's sort of this adventure and romance of mission. But these days, there's less of that. And but I've met other UCC missionaries who have served in like Indonesia or Jerusalem or Mexico, Chile, and they're just very authentic human beings who continue to stand with the oppressed and try to be a voice for them in a world that doesn't listen. And we don't get too much coverage in the news, but we're there. In my story, I don't know if you would remember 9 years ago, we had this big earthquake in Japan. And then there was the nuclear disaster and the tsunami. And I just happened to be living close to where that happened. And my workplace became a relief center. And we started receiving all of these volunteers from all over Japan, young people mostly, and sending them out on bikes to the coast to help tsunami survivors. And so I became a part of this relief effort, working with our partners in Japan to serve people who were hurting and had lost a lot. And so I was writing funding requests to the United Church of Christ, and the United Methodists gave us a lot of money. The Lutheran Federation came, the Mennonites came, the World Council of Churches came. I mean, it was a big thing 9 years ago. And so I was almost like the international correspondent, church person.
Right.
And if you go to the Global Ministries web page, I think my blog from those days is still accessible with all, I kept writing because it was so stressful and I wanted the world to know what was going on, especially, the terrible situation with the nuclear plants and how the Japanese government was trying to downplay it. They still are, because they want the Olympics to come next year. So they don't want the world to know how bad it is. But so, when it counts, our people are there and we have the trusting relationships with the local partner Christians, and we can do things together that are not possible otherwise. I sort of rambled, but
no, that was perfect, because then I didn't have to ask you to tell us about the whole Sendai. I remember reading those blogs and the ones afterwards about the nuclear disaster, and just thinking about the fact, Jeff, that you were there with your wife and your children, when this happened. And I remember, and then afterwards when you came and stayed in our house in Bluegrass for a week or something like that. That was probably a couple years afterwards, and just hearing those stories from you about how you didn't have any tsunami training in seminary. They did not teach you how to become the person in charge of people and money from all over the world to help people who are in the most devastated state, and yet you got them through it and you through it, and thank God you're looking back on it a long time later, although I imagine the effects. I remember one of the points that stuck with me was that you talked about the fact that the ocean had come so far into the farmland that salinization of the farmland would render it, unusable for generations. Have they found ways to repair that land, or is that still the case?
Yeah, well, the salination, it's not generations. I think it took maybe 5 years or so. There are like soybeans and wheat, and there are a few crops that are very good at getting the salt
Okay,
out of the soil.
interesting.
So
Okay,
yeah, they were able to, find
recover that.
appropriate, yeah,
Mhm.
products for that.
Yeah. Do you want to take a couple minutes just to get people up to speed on the nuclear situation in Japan, or where they can find, any more information? Or you do still blog, because you did have a blog pop up recently about a court case, I think it was.
Yeah, that must have been back in March. Actually, I think it was yesterday. There was a very high-level court case that came out. 3,500 people sued the Japanese government because the government could have, they had the information that a big, if a big tsunami came, the nuclear plant was not adequately, uh, prepared.
Yeah.
And so in this court case yesterday, this is the first time that a court has come down in favor of the people who are suing, saying that the government was responsible. But there are many, many court cases against the government because, you know, a lot of people have been forced to leave their homes, and they're asking why. Why did this happen, and who's responsible? And nobody's taken responsibility. So the fight is still going on.
Right.
Another fight that is going on. My good friend, and she's the wife of a pastor. Um, she is one of the two leaders of this lawsuit, and it's for children. The right for children to study in a school that is safe. And so these schools in Fukushima are not safe. The radiation is high, even though the government goes in sometimes and cleanses the streets, or they get the people in the neighborhood to um, clean the gutters, which is very dangerous because a lot of radiation collects where the water is, and so to clean the gutters is almost you're dealing with radiation that is maybe 20 times as high as what it would be if it wasn't a gutter. So anyway, they've been doing a lot of cleansing to bring down the radiation, but still the radiation is high. And so these parents are saying, in the Japanese constitution, it says that everybody has the right to a safe education. And so, the government's not providing us with that safety. And I think that court case, the conclusion will come next spring in March. So that's another one that we're looking at. But the cards are stacked against us because the high courts are all handpicked by the government, and so they rarely go against the government, especially if the industry, if the government sees the industry as a matter of national policy, which the nuclear industry is definitely very high priority for the Japanese government. So they don't want to lose their hold on that and control of that industry.
So some things are the same the world over.
Yep. And we learned this from America, thank you.
Your court system?
General Electric came with their first nuclear plant to the Fukushima area.
Wow. Well, obviously, we're having a great time talking, and I could go on for a long time, but we should probably come to the end. Is there anything surprising about Japan, or you that you for sure want to share with folks this morning? Or anything you would really love them to know about Japan?
Well, I would say that to talk about the church in Japan, Christians are only 1% of the population, so they're a very small presence, but their influence far surpasses their numbers.
Hmm.
But we're also getting old, a lot of elderly people.
Hmm.
So I don't know what the church will look like in 20 years. But I would say that although the church is small, their faith is very strong. And I'll never forget when I was in St. Louis at Eden Seminary, and I was doing a student, what do you call those?
Oh, an internship or something?
Internship, yeah.
Okay.
And so I had the people in my church, read the Bible. We went around in a circle, and we were doing something in the Old Testament, I think, and names like Nebuchadnezzar and the people in the church had never read the Bible out loud, and they were just chuckling and how do you say this name? And I realized, wow, the Japanese Christians are much more literate
Hmm.
in the Bible. I mean, they don't let it up to the pastor.
Oh,
They're at home. They're at home reading the Bible, and when you get together for like a Bible sharing or a prayer gathering, you pick a Bible passage and everybody reads a verse and a prayer. I think most church members, if you ask them to pray, they could pray on the spot. So in a sense, in America, you sort of get used to, just going to church and letting the pastor do everything. Whereas in Japan, it really is on each person's shoulder. And they have this real consciousness that we have to protect this faith in a culture that doesn't appreciate us, So I think there's great merit in being a minority, and how faith is refined when
hmm.
you know that you are small, and when you become big and powerful, you lose that
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Well,
So
you're really
I learn a
carrying.
lot from.
I was just going to say,
What's
each
that?
person is really carrying the torch. Where here it's like, well, if I'm not carrying it, I know all those other people are.
Yeah.
You're really. And so, how will your church? Will your church celebrate Worldwide Communion Sunday? Do you do
Yes.
that? And what will that maybe look like this Sunday? You're not the pastor of the church.
No.
No.
Yeah, we're not doing communion yet,
Okay.
and our church opened on June 1st, and so maybe half of the people go to church and half are online by Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
We don't pass around the offering. We have a basket at the back, and ask people to, if they have an offering, to put it in the basket. So we're not touching the same
Mm-hmm.
basket, and there are no coffee hours or anything after worship. Everybody's wearing a mask, and everybody does the hand sanitizing when they come in, and windows are open. So I don't know when winter rolls around how that will change. But on the other hand, Japan, it doesn't have the numbers that America has in terms of, we have maybe 500 cases a day of new people getting COVID, mostly in the big cities. But it's, our government is, we're not improving, like the numbers are not going down, but they're not spiking up either. It's sort of
Mhm.
stabilized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how things will change, but at this point, World Communion Sunday, uh, yeah, there will be no communion.
No comedian, yeah. Well, if you have an opportunity to share our greetings with your folks, that would be wonderful to let them know that we are thinking about all of them today.
Mhm.
And you'll be hearing more from Jeffrey and an opportunity that we have to reach out and share our greetings with another church in Japan. We're going to be doing that during Advent. You'll hear more about that. And in the meantime, of course, our Neighbors in Need offering, that's the one you said that is for global ministries, and to remember
I
the
think it's our church's world,
or
OGHS.
yeah, that one.
Yes.
Each week we're talking about the various church givings, and people can go to probably ucc.org and then look up World Missions. It's called World Missions now. Is that what's the
Global mission.
Missions? Global Missions. So
And
great.
just, I don't know if you're interested, but my salary doesn't come from Global Ministries.
Oh,
My
wow.
full salary comes from the university where I teach.
Oh, great.
So there are different missionaries, like people we send to Africa, their salaries might come from Global Ministries, but
Yeah.
um, in Japan that doesn't happen. So
Yeah. Wow. Good. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much. It was wonderful to see you, and I just think this is a wonderful opportunity, and I hope we can do something like this again.
yeah, I have just one more thing to say.
Sure.
My father was born in Iowa,
Oh, I forgot about that.
in Keokuk.
Keokuk. Oh,
Yes.
wow. Did he grow up UCC or Congregational in Keokuk?
Well, his father was the pastor of the UCC church there,
Wow.
but his father was then moved to Quincy, Illinois,
Okay.
and was the pastor in Quincy. So my dad grew up in Quincy.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's really neat. Well, thank you so much for being with us,
Yeah.
and we will
Have a nice World Communion Sunday.